Welcome back to the channel, and in this video I'm going to be focusing on putting the ceiling up in the camper van, and I want to get it all covered off in this video. I want to get all of this finished so I can move on to the next thing and forget about it. So I'm going to be cutting the plywood down to shape and size. I'll be cutting out the roof lights, cutting out the ceiling lights, wiring up the max fan, wiring up the ceiling lights, and applying a finish to the plywood so it's not just boring ply that we're looking at. And like I say, once that's done and dusted, we can get it attached to the ceiling and we can forget about it and move on to the next thing. So let's just get our teeth into it, shall we? So I've had to do a little bit of head scratching on how I'm going to tackle this task. And what I didn't want to go doing is just ply lining or tongue and grooving the whole ceiling, because unfortunately I've seen other people that have done that and then they've then screwed their top cupboards into the ceiling and they've sprung a leak and they've had one hell of a game trying to then get that ceiling down. So what I've done is I've battened out where our top cupboards are going to sit, and now hopefully it's just a simple case of cutting our ply to shape and size, and then we can just screw it up between those gaps, and then if ever there's an issue later on down the line, it'll just be a simple case of unscrewing it and just lifting it down, and then we can tackle the problem. Being a medium wheelbase, we thought that we could get away with making the ceiling out of 2 pieces of ply, and it goes without saying to say that the perfect place for us to start was by taking lots of measurements of the open space where our ceiling would screw. After much thought and consideration, in the end we opted to use a 3.5mm thick ply which we picked up from our local builders merchant. We did consider using 6mm thick ply, but in the end it was the weight that we'd be saving which made us opt for the thinner ply. And I'm sure that if you ask anybody out there who's ever built a camper van before, the weight soon adds up inside. So with the ply now cut to length, and after a bit more head scratching, what I've now done is I've marked out where I'm going to put my screws into the ceiling, and I've also marked out very loosely where the roof lights are going to sit. So you can see got the front edge marked out, back edge is marked out as well. There is a rib in the middle and I need to mark that out, but I'm going to do that once I've cut this hole out. The 2 square holes for the roof vents were just a simple case of drilling out the 4 corners to accept a jigsaw and then just cutting the hole out. I have no doubt whatsoever that I'm not the first person who's ever struggled to put up a ceiling in a camper van on their own. Right, so that's a test fit of the ceiling up, and I have to say it was a bit of a pain in the backside trying to put it up on my own, so in the end I had to give Scarlett a shout, and between the two of us we got it up, no problems whatsoever. Anyway, you can see where I've cut my rough holes for the roof lights, and all I need to do now is literally just run a pencil or a crayon on the inside of it and cut it out where the line is, and it'll be nice and flush against the inside of the frame. Of course, what I could have done is I could have just marked it out on the floor, but I know that with my luck I could double check it, triple check my measurements, and I'd still end up cutting it out wrong. So at least this way I know it's going to be done right, and dare I say it, I actually think it's an easier way of doing it. Where the 2 sheets of board meet in the middle of the van, I mean, this goes back to me and my measurements. In the middle of the van where the 2 sheets of ply meet, there's an overlap there, so clearly I've got that measurement wrong somewhere, I don't know how. There's an overlap of about 5mm, so I've just run a pencil down the edge of it, and I'll just whip that end off, and then it'll be nice and flush. But I think I said before that the ply is 122 centimeters across, and where we place the battens for the top cupboards, it nestles nice and neat between those. So once we put the cupboards up, what they'll do, they'll have like a lip on the front face of it, which will obviously overlap the ceiling, and 1, it'll offer support, and 2, it'll hide the slight gap that's showing down either side of it. But anyway, what I need to do now is, there's 2 spaces where the cupboards are going to end. one at the front and one to the rear. That's going to be sealing there. So what I need to do now is I need to take some cardboard and just create a template for that space there, and then we'll cut it out to some plywood and stick it to the ply that's already on the ceiling, and we'll have a nice ceiling then. After loosely cutting some cardboard down to size, our trusty little profile gauge made short work of making a template out of the cardboard to use with the ply. So one taken care of. Template made, it was just a simple case of transferring that to some plywood and then just cutting it out using the drill and the jigsaw again. With the ply cut to size, I tidied up all the rough edges with a bit of sandpaper. To attach the two extension pieces to the main body of ply, two strips of ply were cut and used as a backing. With the main ceiling and the extension piece butted together, Gorilla Glue was applied to the strip and then applied to the back. Weights were rested on the strips to apply pressure, and the ceiling boards were left overnight for the glue to dry. Before we go any further, I just want to quickly show you guys exactly where we're up to with the ceiling. So obviously we've glued the two sheets of board together now, so I wanted to do just one final test fit just to make absolutely certain that everything fits perfectly, and for the most part I think it does. So as far as I'm concerned, that's the template of the ceiling all finished off. So with that, I've marked out the 3 points for our ceiling lights, and all I need to do now is take it down, cut those holes out, and then we can think about our final finish. There was one other thing that I wanted to mention before I take the ceiling down, which I didn't give any thought to, but as you can see, there's a couple of places where the ceiling's warping. So where our cupboards are going to sit, what I intend to do is I'm going to use some offcuts, and I'm literally just going to glue them on the inside of that lip, and then it'll hopefully hold the ceiling down nice and snug. And then of course once we put the cupboards up and the front of the cupboards sort of nestled nice and snug against the ceiling, hopefully it'll look nice and straight to the eye. I've managed to acquire a few hole saws over the years, but did I have the size that I actually needed? No. The leaflet that came with the ceiling lights said that the hole needed to be 58mm, and locally the closest hole saw size that I could find was 57mm, so that's what I went with. And when the time came to smooth out the rough edges of the hole, I just went at it a little bit more vigorously with the sandpaper. Now the question that some of you might be asking yourselves is, what are they going to be covering up that boring old plywood? And the answer to that is in this bag here: newspapers. And not just any old newspaper. Well, in actual fact, they are old, they're vintage. I mean, some of these are like over 100 years old. I mean, this one here, for instance, that's 1914. And what we plan to do with these is we're going to wallpaper paste the ceiling, stick these to it, and hopefully it'll look great once it's finished. We just think it'll be something a little bit different to the average campervan ceiling that you see out there. After a bit of research, we found that other people had used Solvite for sticking wallpaper to their campervans and caravans, so that's what we opted to use on our ceiling. Having never done anything like this before, rightly or wrongly, we decided to tackle it exactly as we would the walls in our home. We sized the 2 sheets of ply and we left them overnight for them to fully absorb the paste. Scarlett's had a good rummage through all the newspapers and she's picked out all of the interesting pages that she likes the look of and strategically placed them all across the 2 sheets of ply that we're using for the ceiling. So now it's just going to be a case of slopping some wallpaper paste down and sticking them down to it. When the time came for sticking the newspaper down to the ply, initially we approached it exactly the same as we would wallpapering a wall, methodically and neatly. We soon realised that the best way to complete this task was to not be shy with the paste and to just slop it down and just to get on with it. The only real care and attention that we put into it was the actual positioning of the newspaper itself and brushing it flat to avoid any creases. Because the paste was easily absorbed into the newspaper and the newspaper itself is very thin, we had to be really careful when it came to manipulating it on the ply, as overworking it with the brush or being too heavy-handed could easily tear it. So that's the ply covered in all the newspaper now. There's only one thing left that I want to do before we put it back into the van, and that's to... Really? What are you doing? You're following me? Oh, we've set her off. We tucked all the edges in, tidied it all up, so it's all, well, it's all neat and tidy now, like I say. And anyway, there's one thing left for us to do before we can think about putting it up in the van. And that's we're gonna cover it with some decorator's varnish just to seal and protect it. So I'm gonna brush a couple of coats of that on now, and then, like I just said, we can think about putting it back up in the van. Now a little of this stuff goes an awful long way, so for the first coat we decided to work it in one direction, and then when the time came to put the second coat down, we worked it in the other. So in effect, we aimed for one coat down the length of the board, and then the second coat across it. The only area that we had to give thought to was where the newspaper would originally been folded in half, because although the newspaper was flat against the ply, there was still a tiny ridge there and the varnish would try and pull in those areas. Now before we can do the final fix to the ceiling, there's a couple of little things that I've had to take care of, and while everything's all open, I just want to show you, rather than tell you, I want to show you, or I want to tell you and I want to show you. Anyway, where the top cupboards are going to go, what I've done is I've put a couple of little offcuts that I've glued just to the top of it, because I've seen on other people's builds where they've used a thin ply for the ceiling, like myself. You can see on some photos and videos that it warps, so, and it's particularly noticeable above cupboards and whatnot. So where our cupboards are going to sit, like I say, I've just put a little overlap just so the ceiling's got something to sort of press against and not bow past. And then when we get the front face of the cupboards put on, that'll just bite into the top edge of the, well, that'll just bite into the ceiling. It'll be nice and smooth across. And the other thing that we've had to do is just solder the cables together for the Max fan. And I'm completely new to soldering, so I'm sure there's plenty of room for improvement, plenty of scope to sort of perfect the technique, but that's a nice solid connection there. So yeah, we're ready to put the ceiling up. As before, Scarlett had to give me a hand getting the ceiling back up, and we just secured it with a couple of screws, and then she left me to put the rest in. We wanted to use the smallest screws possible so that they wouldn't be noticeable, and unfortunately I can't remember what they are off the top of my head, so what I'll do is I'll drop a link down in the description if you want to find out. Now for the Max Fan Deluxe finishing trim, I've just had to take a notch out the top end of it, and that's to accept the cables that are powering the unit. So with the trim pushed firmly in place against the ceiling, those two cables there will nestle nice and neatly between the gap that we've created there, and there's no pinching, and they're free to move around. And the only other thing I need to do before I can fit the unit is I've marked out where I'm going to drill some pilot holes to accept the 4 screws that hold the unit in place. So I'll crack on with that now. So that's the ceiling taken care of then. We've fitted the lights now and put the trim on for the 2 roof vents, and it looks really nice. There's a couple of things that we need to take care of. The first being I'm not entirely happy with the screws that I've used for the trim. I've misplaced the screws that came with the Max Fan Deluxe, so I've had to replace them with those jobbies, and they're a bit unsightly. So I mean, what we intend to do, it's probably worth mentioning, what we intend to do is we're going to paint the trim on the roof vents a different colour just to make it a little bit more interesting, but that can wait till another day. And of course when we do that, we'll paint the screws as well, just to tie it all in so they're not as noticeable. The other thing that's probably worth mentioning is where the 2 sheets of ply of the ceiling meet, obviously you've got a break there, so what we're going to do is we're going to put a bit of trim across it just to sort of hide that gap. But I mean, because the ceiling's so busy, it's not, unless you go looking for it, it's not that noticeable anyway. But we are going to put a bit of trim across it just to tidy it up, and we'll probably paint that the same colour as the 2 roof vents. And I know I mentioned earlier about and showing you the tabs that I've put across the battens for the top cupboards, and you can see there that it's, in doing so, it's just helped keep that ceiling nice and flush. There's no warping there, no bowing, it's nice and straight, and exactly the same on the back one too. And like I said before, when we put the cupboards up, there'll be a front face, and that'll just nip into the ceiling and again keep everything nice and tight and nice neat straight edge. And just to make sure that my lights and the Max Fan are all connected properly and running fine, what I've done is I've used the old battery just to test them. And that's our ceiling finished. It might not be everyone's cup of tea, but it works for us, and it's got our personality stamped all over it. So there you have it guys, that's the ceiling all taken care of, and hopefully you'll agree with me when I say that I think it's turned out alright in the end. I think it looks quite nice, something a little bit different to what you normally see out there. And on that note, I think we'll knock it on the head. There's only one thing left for me to say, and that's thank you so much for watching this video. And until next time guys, take it easy, stay safe, and fingers crossed, we'll see you in the next video. If you enjoyed this video, then please give us a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more and you haven't done so already, then please consider subscribing. And don't forget to hit that notification bell down below so you know exactly when we put up a new video. Until next time guys, take it easy, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video.